What we're bringing to the world is a new way to fly. The idea is to be more like a cruise ship. We want a little more room in the seats, more room in the aisles.
The world's two biggest manufacturers of passenger jets. Crucial decisions for the future of air travel. Airbus and Boeing, and the fate of giant aircraft they call super jumbos. Two giant companies, Europe's Airbus industry and America's Boeing, fiercely compete for the bulk of the world's airliner business. For years, they've been talking of plans to build giant new aircraft, super jumbos, capable of carrying up to 1,000 passengers. For more than 30 years, Boeing has laid claim to building the world's biggest passenger jet with its 747. Its latest model, the 747-400, has a maximum takeoff weight of almost 900,000 pounds. Building the first 747 was considered the most expensive gamble in aviation history. Now, Airbus industry is taking the plunge. Airbus has announced it will build a super jumbo, a double-decker with a takeoff weight of almost 1,200,000 pounds. Airbus has orders for 60 of what was called the A3XX in the design stage and will enter the Airbus fleet as the A380. Airbus says the Super Jumbo will enter airline service in 2006. For now, it's just a very elegant mock-up. John Leahy is Airbus's Vice President, Customer Affairs.
When the 747 came out, a long trip was going from Montreal, perhaps, to Paris. Now we're talking about going from Toronto to Hong Kong. That's a much longer trip, over twice as far, and that means you need more room, you need more space, you need a better quality of the flight.
This concept interior features luxurious seating and lounges for first and business classes.
What you're in today is the A380-800. Now that's an 8,000 nautical mile aircraft, and the Dash 800 means a fully developed airplane. In a three-class configuration, it'll have about 555, 560 seats. That's in a first class, business class, and luxurious economy class configuration. We put in passenger amenities, perhaps the shopping mall, the duty-free shop, or the casino or restaurant down there.
Boeing was going to stretch its 747-400 with the 400X to match Airbus's challenge. But after years of development work, it has shelved the 400X. Instead, Boeing says it will focus on point-to-point medium-capacity aircraft. Boeing's marketing director, Gord McHenry.
We don't see the passengers demanding that much for a larger airplane, because we see the greater demand by the passengers being, give me the frequencies, give me comfortable surroundings, and give me low fares. The vast majority of takeoffs and landing, in excess of 85%, are with airplanes that are less than 300 seats. So much of the apparent congestion at the large airports is due to the takeoff and landings of airplanes the size of 737s, 757s, 767s. So bringing in an airplane larger than the 747-400 will not mitigate against the current congestion. It may actually increase it slightly.
Airlines expect a threefold increase in passengers over the next 20 years, with the biggest increase in the Asia-Pacific market. Airbus says the solution to congestion and overcrowded runways at hub airports is bigger aircraft. Adam Brown is Airbus's Vice President, Market Forecasts.
The problem is that we've seen a tenfold increase in traffic over the last 30 years. At the same time, the airports have got pretty much saturated. In Europe, we've seen over the whole year, more than 30% of all flights being delayed more than 15 minutes. And there's no technological breakthrough on the horizon that's at the stroke of a wand going to change that situation. There has to be a big airplane out there, and the A380 is our solution to that problem.
In a way,
Paul Proctor of Aviation Week magazine.
Boeing has proven and forecast and proven the fact that more people want to go directly from a town like Manchester, England to Miami rather than go through hubs. I guess the determining point is going to be how hard it is to get these airplanes into the big hubs and how much people really want to fly through hubs.
Airbus argues that new aircraft have longer range and passengers shouldn't be trapped in their seats on long-haul flights.
In the 21st century, we're going to be flying longer distances. People don't like to stop. Now, when the 747 and other aircraft of that generation were designed, we were talking about 5 or 6 hour flights across North America or across the North Atlantic. When you get into 14, 15, 17-hour flights, the whole dynamic changes. You need a vehicle that's more like a cruise ship. You need room to get up and walk around. You need the chance to change your environment. You need a chance to stretch your legs, get out there and feel better about the travel experience.
Boeing built a mock-up and developed computer imagery of its proposed 400X. It planned sleeping berths in the area above the main cabin. Now it's going to leave the prestigious high-end super jumbo market to the competition.
I think it's really important to understand that Boeing has never said there's not a market for an airplane larger than the 400. We've always said that it's a very small market which will take over 20 years to develop. Because an all-new airplane under our business case would be very difficult, if not impossible, for us to make money.
Boeing executives think Airbus is overambitious, especially when it talks of ultimately stretching its super jumbo to carry 800 and more passengers. Walt Orlowski is Vice President, General Manager of Boeing's 747 program.
There will not be a demand in the next 40 or 50 years for an 800-passenger airplane. There would not be a sufficient demand. If we were building a brand new airplane like Airbus is doing, the numbers got to be a lot larger. They've got to be able to sell 600, 700 or more airplanes. You know, selling 600 or 700 over a 30-year period ain't going to do it.
The market for this aircraft is about 1,550 units. That's including over 300 freighter versions. That's over the next 20 years, and we had expected to split that in the market, maybe 60-40, with the Boeing 747X. Now, I understand they've just withdrawn that aircraft from the market, so I guess we're going to have most of this market to ourselves, as much as the 747 had that market to themselves for about 30 years.
Jet airliners have been a hit with passengers for half a century, and Boeing was in on the ground floor. Its 707, the world's first successful jet airliner, entered service in 1958. Veteran Boeing test pilot Brian Weigel.
Well, the passengers were so taken with things. I remember everybody was astonished at the lack of vibration. It was so smooth. Gypsy Rose Lee, she was on that flight from Miami to New York, and a lot of other notables. But however, the thing that she announced to the reporters that met her in New York was that the most marvelous thing about them was the flush toilets. And it's true, those were the first airplanes with truly flush toilets.
Passenger capacity expanded dramatically in the early years, then stopped 30 years ago with the 747. Now Airbus plans a family of super jumbos. Some will have double the capacity of a 747.
In our forecast, we have a category of 500-seaters, 600-seaters, 800-seaters, and 1,000-seaters.
At Airbus headquarters in Toulouse, the dice have been thrown. The company says it will spend $11 billion bringing the super jumbo into production. There are about 12,000 airliners with more than 100 passenger seats flying today. In 20 years, there could be 20,000. Airbus and Boeing are gearing up for a competitive battle with countless billions of dollars at stake. Next. Boeing's biggest new aircraft since it created the 747 3 decades ago is the twin-engined 777 that entered service in 1998. The stretch version, the 777-300, has the same seating capacity as early models of the 747, but it's 1/3 cheaper to operate. It's Boeing's first commercial airliner completely designed on computers, and many of the refinements on this aircraft were to be models for Boeing's canceled Super Jumbo, the 747-400X. Computers pointed the way to cost-saving production methods, found ways to save weight, improve the wing foil, and control systems. If Boeing one day decides it will build the 400X, the lessons learned in designing the 777 will make it a highly efficient aircraft. The 400X designs are complete. The factory could easily be converted to its production. But for the moment, Boeing says speed is more important than size. It says it will build a new medium-capacity jet, the world's fastest subsonic airliner, flying point-to-point routes at Mach 0.95. It's called the Sonic Cruiser. The announcement came in the heels of Airbus's decision to build a new Super Jumbo, and some felt it was an attempt to buck up the morale of Boeing employees. In Europe, Airbus is constantly expanding its range of aircraft. John Blanchfield, Airbus's Director of Product Marketing.
The highest capacity Airbus today is the A340-600. That can carry up to 440 passengers. The first ones of those aircraft are in production right now, and they'll go into service in 2002.
The A340-600 is a jumbo in its own right. The latest and biggest of Airbus's A330, A340 fleet, it's the first in the world to be 100% computer designed.
The A340-600 be the biggest and I think most beautiful airplane that Airbus has built so far. Very close in size to today's biggest airplane, and because it's got much more advanced technology. After all, the existing biggest airplane was designed and developed over 30 years ago. And during those 30 years, a lot of advances across a whole range of technologies have become available. We exploit those in the A340-600. And so the A340-600 will do pretty much the job of today's biggest airplane, but at much lower cost.
Airlines' search for lower operating costs has driven the passenger jet market since the advent of de Havilland's Comet 1 half a century ago. Airbus's Adam Brown has vivid memories of the Comet's first scheduled passenger flight, May 2nd, 1952.
I was in Latin class one afternoon in my prep school in England, and there was a loud noise in the sky, and we all of us looked at each other because we knew this was the first BOAC scheduled flight to going London, Rome, Cairo, Khartoum, Entebbe, down to Johannesburg. So at that point, Europe had a tremendous lead.
Peter Duffy, a Canadian, was a Comet pilot.
Wherever we went, we were the subject of spectator sports. We were a unique aeroplane. We looked nice. People said, this is the way to go. And the passengers loved it. When you put up the power on takeoff, you could feel the aircraft shake and shudder, always on the brakes to make sure that all the engines are working okay. And you had a clutched lever which released the brakes progressively, and so the airplane would suddenly start moving. The crew on the Comet 1 was a captain, a co-pilot who did the navigation. He'd leap out of the right-hand pilot seat at about 20,000 feet on the climb and do the navigation, and then leap into the seat on the descent. And if it was his turn to do the landing, he'd do the landing as well. We didn't have navigational aids like GPS, inertial navigation. We were navigating by sextants. We would take star shots and moon shots, and we would use radio beacons to take bearings, and we would plot running fixes, and we would plot 3 star shots together, and hopefully we would navigate that way.
The Comet 1 had many technical problems and one fatal flaw. Its pressurized fuselage was not strong enough.
The aircraft was on the climb out from Rome. probably around about 30,000 feet. The captain was in the middle of a radio transmission, and it was broken off. It was the instant, no doubt, when the aircraft exploded. And all the pieces were found in the bottom of the Mediterranean.
3 months later, after some minor modifications, the Comet was authorized to fly again. Duffy made the first flight to Johannesburg and back to Heathrow. There he handed the aircraft over to a South African crew.
The next day, it was at the bottom of the Mediterranean, in similar circumstances to the original Elba crash. Of course, that was the end of the aircraft. It was grounded. The investigation of rebuilding found evidence that there had been an explosive decompression of the cabin.
After the Comet 1s were grounded in April 1954, another 4 years would pass before another passenger jet took to the skies. A totally new comet, the Comet 4, emerged in 1958.
We did two sorts of services, the puddle jumper, short-range services, picking up traffic everywhere, and the long, fast services to the Far East and through the Middle East. And we landed at just about every airport there is. These days, airlines are seeing the virtue of getting aircraft on a point-to-point basis without going through hubs and not necessarily on the longest routes.
Oh, hi, Bob. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Peter Duffy and a group of Comet enthusiasts are helping to restore a Comet 4 for the Seattle Museum of Flight. Bob Hood is in charge of the project.
When the airplane was new, it had 22 first-class passengers and 59 tourist class. Now, that for that day was a large airplane.
Wow, this really looks something.
Quite different from when you saw it last. Incredible, too, is it had marvelous performance on high-altitude short fields. What we are doing here is attempting to make the airplane look exactly as it did when it first entered service. Starting with the floor and working our way up, we are going to reproduce the exact situation using new fabrics and using everything that a passenger would have seen who'd gotten into the airplane at that time. These people started with a blank piece of paper. They had no computers. They had none of the things that we take for granted in the aircraft industry today. And what they did is they created a step change in aviation. The social size of the world was shrunk by 50% when this airplane came out.
The Comet 4 was obsolete before it made its first flight. The American 707s and DC-8s were bigger, faster, carried far more passengers, and had longer range. There followed a long period of American dominance in passenger jets, but the British and the Europeans didn't give up.
In the mid-60s, a number of quite visionary people, primarily in France and in Germany, decided that if the civil aircraft manufacturing capacity of Europe were to be recreated, it would have to be done on a collaborative basis. At the same time, various people working away did discover that a new market was going to develop for a big, short-range mass transport type airplane, hence the word Airbus. In 1969, a decision was taken to create Airbus industry around a program that was called the A380. And the argument was that, well, even if these crazy Europeans manage to get the airplane to fly, first of all, they'll never persuade anybody to certificate it as safe. And then, well, even if they do manage to get it in service, they'll never manage to support it. The spare parts won't be there, the documentation will be non-understandable and so on. And it really was having placed airplanes in, as I said, in India, in South Africa, in Korea, that all of a sudden people said, well, hey, wait a minute, this thing does seem to work after all. We now have products that satisfy just about the whole range of airline needs from 100 seats and up. We've now sold more than 4,000 of these airplanes, and last year we actually picked up better than 50% share of the world market. So we've come a long way in 30 years.
Airbus is now running neck and neck with Boeing on a wide range of airliners and is poised to supplant Boeing's flagship 747 with its Super Jumbo. Next. Toulouse, in southwest France. An ancient city, its university was founded in 1229. Now it's a major high-tech center, home to Airbus industry. Airbus is a young company, formed only 30 years ago. With the 340-600, Airbus is building an aircraft bigger than the first 747s. It's the longest airliner ever built. Airbus makes extensive use of a ground-based test unit called the Iron Bird. It can duplicate all of the physical and electronic functions found on the aircraft. Once the systems are developed, they're built into the aircraft's simulator. Ed Strongman is project pilot for the A340-600.
My task is to maintain that product line. It's to make the next airplane, the 500-600, fly just like our other airplanes. For the 3XX, we will take the lessons that we've learned and use the basis, of course, of what is an Airbus cockpit and an Airbus airplane, but develop into the future.
100 knots.
Early on, Airbus decided that one way to attract and keep customers was to make the cockpits of all of its aircraft, big or small, look the same. It's one of its biggest selling points.
First of all, the actual design of the flight decks got to be the same. That's positions of controls and switches and instruments. The way information is displayed on instruments, CRT displays, that's got to be the same.
50, 40.
I think in 10 years' time, we will have airlines where perhaps more experienced pilots would be flying a 100-seat, 70-ton A380 on a Monday and actually turn up for duty and are flying an A3XX the next day.
Seattle, Washington. Boeing has been making aircraft in the area for 85 years. It's the most experienced airline manufacturer in the world. Since it acquired McDonnell Douglas, it has no domestic competition. Boeing put a great deal of expertise into the design of the cockpit of its 777. It would have been the model for the cockpit of its canceled Super Jumbo. John Cashman is Boeing's chief test pilot.
In the 777, we actually started an engineering cab of this sort about 5 years before the first delivery of the aircraft. Flight decks are continuously evolving in their functionality. So we are now adding features in the 777 that were not originally there and will be worked into all our fleet. And as the flight decks start to come together, which is our goal, then that training goes down. So commonality between the flight decks is extremely important and one of our major goals in flight deck design.
Everything is designed to ease the workload of the pilot and co-pilot in the now standard two-man aircrew. Boeing's passenger jets of today can trace their ancestry to the big jet bombers of the 1950s. In that era, Boeing, on its own, developed the legendary 707 as an aerial tanker to accompany the B-52. Retired engineer Joe Sutter has had a role in the design of every Boeing airliner, beginning with the 707.
The jets were coming on, the B-47 and B-52, and Boeing could see the advantages of jet-powered. The B-52 produced an engine that could go onto a commercial airplane. They began studying jet transports. They built a prototype 707 called the 367-80. I did the aerodynamics work on that airplane, then worked on the 707 project. And the 707 really made commercial air travel. It made it affordable to many people. The 707, I think, started the jet age.
Joe Sutter's design was enormously successful. The Dash 80, the 707 prototype, is still maintained in flying condition at Boeing. Test pilot Lou Wallach was working at B-47s and B-52s. Then he switched to the Dash 80.
To me, it was a real thrill to fly the Dash 80 because it was so new and so revolutionary as far as transport airplanes were concerned. The Smithsonian Institute, which actually owns this airplane now, says it's one of the most significant airplanes in the world. It started all the series of 707s, 727s, 737s, 747, 757, 767, and 777 airplanes. I used to particularly enjoy taking the senior pilots out in the airplanes. They'd never flown before. Put them in the left seat, the pilot's seat, show them how to start the engines, taxi out, have them take off, fly for maybe an hour, hour and a half, and they were always a little apprehensive maybe at first, but by the time you would land and they got off the airplane, they had a grin on their face from ear to ear.
Passengers accustomed to bouncing through the sky on noisy, low-flying piston aircraft found vibration-free jet travel a revelation. But aircraft purchases are driven by economics, and airlines found jets cost half as much to fuel and maintain. Because they were fast, they could make more flights. Airlines could make money on the 707 even when they lowered fares. And so air travel across continents and oceans became available to millions. But Boeing didn't stop with the 707. The next move for Boeing was a step into the unknown, building the world's first jumbo jet, the 747. Joe Sutter was named chief engineer on the project. He's known throughout the industry as the father of the 747.
The 747 came into being because Pan American was the big long-haul airline of the U.S. and in the world at that time. Juan Trippe, who was chairman of Pan Am, was a real visionary, and he decided the way to really make this go is to seek a much bigger airplane. They asked me to set up a small group to study a large airplane. When we started the airplane and we were seeking 350 passengers, the first thought of the engineers were, well, just put two decks, one on top of another. The engineers working for me decided that was the wrong way to go. In the early 70s, everybody thought the supersonic transports were going to take over the world. So we had the added pressure of building an airplane that would start out being a good passenger airplane, but if the supersonic airplane took over, the airplane would have to be a good freighter. That caused us to wonder, how do you load the freight? And one way to load the freight is through a nose door, and that produced the fact that we had to put the cockpit either above or below that freight deck. We chose the upper position for many reasons.
Brian Weigel was co-pilot for Chief Test Pilot Jack Waddell on the 747's maiden flight. The whole world was watching.
But I think it was one of the most thrilling things you can ever do. And on the first takeoff, and to get this airplane in the air, and with this huge mass of people watching, to say nothing of television of all kinds. I'm sure we all felt a little nervous, but once we got in the air, I think we were all pretty relaxed.
February 9th, approaching takeoff time. The flight crew moves out to the waiting airplane. Pilot Jack Waddell. Co-pilot Brian Weigel. Flight engineer Jess Waller.
There was so much at stake, of course, the financial future of the company was riding on it.
Hey, Paul, let me know when to release brake.
Takeoff requires only 4,300 feet of roll.
My wife, Nancy, people would meet her on the street and she'd say, your husband's designing a big airplane. Will it fly?
Spread them around for me, Brian. Watch those hips.
And she got that question asked so many times that, it was worrying on her, that this thing was going to be what I'd call a turkey. So on the first flight, when you fellas took off, I took her right at the unstick point. And I told her, Nancy, the wheels are going to leave the ground right here. And they did.
You know, Joe, I think we were a close-knit group then, though. Jack Waddell and all of us were...
It was our whole life.
Yeah, it really was. It was our whole life.
The 747 was a truly revolutionary aircraft. Its engines had twice the thrust of any built before. It had the first inertial guidance system, fully powered hydraulic control systems. It was 30% cheaper to run than the 707. Airlines could make money when a 747 was only half full.
So it started out a little bit large, but as the economy grew up, it just made its own markets. The cost of flying a passenger, they were about 30% lower than, say, the 707.
The 747 has undergone constant revision. The newest models have a digital cockpit for a two-man crew. Redesigned wings with winglets to reduce drag at the tips, carbon brakes to reduce weight. Newer engines have added 1,000 miles to the aircraft's range with lower fuel burn and reduced toxic emissions. But now there are questions about the 747's future. After years of design and engineering, the 400X has been dropped. And now the 747 must confront its first real competition, Airbus's Super Jumbo. Next. Designing and building a sophisticated new aircraft is a daunting and expensive task. Airbus estimates the prototype of its A380 Super Jumbo will cost about $11 billion US. Hundreds of engineers must work on everything from rivets to toilets.
What we're bringing to the world is a new way to fly. In this airplane, which we're looking at here today, you've got 49% more floor space on the two main decks than you've got in what's admittedly a very comfortable 747. Yet you've only got 1/3 more passengers. So that means everybody has more room in the seat, more room in the aisle, and that all-important extra room to get up and walk around. Today we expect people to sit still, have a meal, maybe 2 or 3, watch a movie, maybe 2 or 3, but essentially not move around. On this airplane, you'll be able to get up, to walk around, do some shopping, go to a casino, perhaps even an exercise lounge. The idea is to be more like a cruise ship. And as we walk around this aircraft, I think you'll agree it looks more like a cruise ship than it does like an aircraft.
The Super Jumbo has to fit within the 80-meter square footprint available at airports. That dictated a double-decker, one wide body stacked on top of another wide body. The 380 will have a maximum takeoff weight of 560 metric tons. The landing gear to handle this enormous weight will weigh 20 tons. Airbus has conducted full-weight load tests to ensure runways at major airports will be able to carry the aircraft. The shape and size of the wing is crucial, and more than 50 wind tunnel tests dictated a wing surface of 845 square meters. The tailplane surface is 200 square meters, and the tail fin 25 meters high. Aircraft manufacturers do not build new aircraft on speculation. The market is customer-driven. And Airbus mounted an international campaign to get potential customers involved in its design.
We got 20 of the world's leading airlines together, and they spent 3.5 to 4 years working with us. They sent their cockpit specialist, their payload specialist, interior design specialist, so that when we were ready to go to the market, it's no wonder it sold so fast.
Chris Stonehouse is Airbus's marketing director.
All of the different elements of the aircraft, we have been through studiously with all of the airlines to try and obtain the best product that we can for them with this new airplane. I think one of the key items is going to be the cabin on the A380. The airlines are going to use that obviously as their new benchmark in terms of comfort standards, and I think it's going to generate new levels of profitability for the airlines as well.
Peter Chandler was a pilot with Virgin Atlantic. He was consulted on the design of the A3XX in the early stages. Now he's been appointed a test pilot on the Super Jumbo.
During those working groups, we present what is being developed and what the ideas are, and it's an opportunity for the airlines to make comments, a lot of which are, well, all of them are listened to very carefully, and some of them are incorporated then in the development and the design of the airplane. The way a new airplane is developed, it's a mix of inputs, so there will be the basic performance inputs from what is required of the airplane, its size, its payload, its range. Where the test pilots come into it very much then is, for example, from the avionics and the displays, even through to then looking in the simulator to develop the flight control laws.
There are 2 final assembly plants for Airbus aircraft, in Toulouse and in Hamburg, Germany. With partners in 4 countries, Airbus has evolved a diversified but highly efficient manufacturing system. Dennis Dempster, Airbus's product marketing director.
We have factories in Spain, France, Germany, and the UK. The parts in these factories are nearly completed. The wings that you see behind me are delivered with all the systems already installed and rigged. This means that only about 5% of the man-hours required to build an aircraft are actually expended in final assembly.
Completed components arrive at the assembly plant aboard Airbus's Super Beluga transporters, A320s with a huge double-bubble cargo hold mounted atop the fuselage. It can hold fuselage sections and whole wings.
The A3XX will be built in a similar manner. The parts will be coming from the same factories. The assembly will follow the same lines as we do here. It takes us only about 8 days to assemble an aircraft, to get it on its own wheels, and from then it moves on its own wheels. But another 8 days to test all the systems, another 8 or 9 days to paint it, and a few more weeks just to assemble it and get it flying.
By contrast, Boeing 747s are put together on a wholly integrated assembly line as they have for 35 years. The aircraft are built in the world's largest building. It covers 98 acres, has a volume of 472 million cubic feet. Jack Jones, Boeing's Director of Operations, runs the 777 and 747 factory.
We have 6 million parts that go on a 747. About 2.5, 3 million of those parts are fasteners. There's screws and bolts and rivets and things like that. So the challenge is getting all those parts to come together every time we build an airplane. That is what we call final body join position. It is where all the major wings and major body section components are actually pulled together, joined, and form the airplane.
The now abandoned 400X would have competed head-on with the Airbus Super Jumbo. It would have seated about 650 passengers with room for some luxury features. Tom Wagner, Deputy Director, Product Marketing.
We have a substantial amount of space in the aft half of the airplane above the passenger compartment that today is not utilized.
That unused space offered Boeing engineers and designers opportunities for innovation. But those plans are now on hold. The 400X would have been relatively easier and a less expensive project for Boeing. But Airbus offered a bold new aircraft, Boeing a reworked older aircraft, and the orders went to Airbus. Next. With thousands of new and bigger aircraft entering airline fleets, the strain on airport infrastructure, already severe, could well become unmanageable. Airbus contends its Super Jumbos won't add to the problem.
There is a general, quite a widespread view that the very large airplane is going to cause problems at the airport. But the problems at the airport are not going to be caused by the airplanes. The problems at the airport are going to be caused by just the sheer throughput of passengers. If you imagine a situation with 3 times as many travelers as today, that means 3 times as many check-in desks and 3 times as many ticket desks and 3 times as much baggage handling and 3 times as many customs and immigration. So the big airplane, provided it's designed so that it's compatible with the design of the airports, and that's why we're being very, very careful with the 3XX, provided the airplane is compatible with the design of current airports, we think it's part of the solution.
I think for the economy class passengers, things aren't going to change a whole lot. In fact, I think it may even get worse because they're going to feel like they're back there packed like cattle. All these cruise ship changes that they're being promised are all for the premium class passenger. And history has shown that when there's space available on an airplane, they're going to put a seat on it. Also, cargo space in the belly. Cargo pays much more than passengers do per pound, don't need coffee, and it doesn't mind if there's an intermediate stop.
To Boeing, the decision to abandon its Super Jumbo was dictated by economics.
We do not believe the market over the next 20 years will be large enough to justify the development costs for a new airplane. And we've studied this extensively over the last 7 to 8 years and concluded that the market just does not sustain that kind of decision.
But the highly adaptable 747 airframe can accommodate a bigger stretch. And some speculate Boeing will re-enter the fray if airlines embrace Airbus's Super Jumbo concept.
The design restriction is how much thrust you can get divided by the weight and how much lift can you generate. We've looked at that limit. It's probably on an airplane that's like 800 passengers. So technically, we could keep stretching the airplane in a derivative format and not reach this mathematical constraint until out to 800 passengers.
The two companies have taken the same forecasts of air travel growth and come up with different views of what they mean.
What Boeing are advocating at the moment is that the airlines will continue to have fragmentation. And that means more point-to-point services between different continents around the world. We also believe in that, and that's why we have a family of aircraft which does pretty much the same thing as what their aircraft do as well. But where we differ slightly in view is that we believe that you will still have consolidation. And consolidation is basically operating flights between the major capitals around the world. These key hubs will continue to grow, and that the slots out of those hubs will continue to become more precious.
So most of the world's airlines had a chance to evaluate both the 747X and the A380. Over the last 8 to 9 months, it's been unanimous.
We see the airlines worldwide taking something like 14,700 airplanes altogether over the next 20 years, and we see that as being worth about 1.3 trillion US dollars.
Airbus believes 250 billion of that market will be for Super Jumbos, aircraft bigger than anything now flying. It estimates its development costs on the 380 at $10.7 billion.
We've already spent about $1 billion US on this aircraft, and that's a record. We'll spend the other $9.7 billion to get to the $10.7 billion over the next 5 to 6 years, culminating in the entry into service of the first aircraft in March of 2006.
What you've got to ask is there the market that they project out there? They're saying 1,200 planes. There's a demand for 1,200 400-seat and larger planes over the next 20 to 30 years. And they need to get a significant part of that, 50%, to even begin to come close to break even on this airplane. I've even seen forecasts where if they don't deliver 300 airplanes over the first 5 years of production, the program goes negative forever.
We've got quite a few of the leading airlines of the world on board. Singapore Airlines is on board, Qantas, Air France is on board, Virgin. Richard Branson is going to do quite a few new things with this product.
I think we need to be very careful in order that we don't become complacent, because the competition can soon come back very quickly, and we need to make sure that we keep this aircraft on track, on time and on budget, and we deliver the aircraft that the airlines have bought. And obviously if we start to drop the ball on that, then that will open the door for Boeing to come back in with possibly another product.
Boeing's first response, its Mach 0.95 aircraft. Airbus partners too know something about building fast aircraft. Their experience with the Concorde could drive their future designs. But for now, Boeing says faster, Airbus says bigger, and the end is not in sight.